How could a broke ship mechanic force the Coast Guard to train their guns at high noon? That was the question everyone at the port of Galveston was asking that day. But they didn't see. When the old man was slammed onto the steel deck, an antique service badge slipped from his jacket pocket etched with only G3 to 89. And only one persona young officer recognized it was no ordinary badge. It was the covert code name of a mission erased from the annals of the U.S. Navy. And the man they just handcuffed before them was the reason 231 lives had been spared. How could a poor deckhand force the entire Coast Guard unit to draw their weapons in broad daylight? That question rang out like a strange bell on the overcast morning at the port of Galveston. A chilly wind swept in from the Gulf of Mexico, carrying salty mist mingled with the scent of old engine oil and rust eating into the wooden planks. At Dock 14, a gaunt old man in a faded work uniform was bent over inspecting a weld under the hull. Gideon Holtiff. Anyone ever cared to ask, his name moved quietly amid the hundreds of vessels of all sizes. His name was as unassuming as his silhouette against the cold steel and brine. He was always the same. Arriving early, leaving late, speaking little, intervening never. He was like a living shadow amid the metal and seawater, diligent yet invisible. Each morning he piloted his small rickety wooden boat alongside the low dock, toolbox's lid long lost, a few lengths of rope, and a portable welding tank in tow. Only that morning, nothing followed the usual routine. The Coast Guard radar station detected an odd signal, an object affixed near the auxiliary exhaust of the Gunnersville, a military equipment transport just out of maintenance. Data indicated it was a rudimentary sonar device, undocumented in any technical ledger, homemade enough to be dismissed but sophisticated enough to trigger a Level 2 alert. Less than 15 minutes later, the rapid response team was dispatched. A patrol boat sliced through the water like a blade. 5 armored Coast Guard servicemen leapt onto the pier like hunting wolves. They offered no warning, asked no questions. Gideon had no chance to explain. He was forced face down onto the metal deck, his arms twisted behind him and snapped into cold steel handcuffs. His cheek struck a patch of flaking paint on the container floor. The pain did not register on his face, perhaps because he had long ago learned to endure it. Not one of them noticed his eyesight devoid of fear or anger, but heavy with the exhaustion of a man who'd carried too much. Gideon did not resist. He stayed silent, as though the only thing he fought to preserve in that moment was a fragment of memory he refused to let shatter. But then it slipped away. A light clatter rang out across the steel, a metallic scrape, like a blade slicing through time. A frayed lanyard and a tarnished service badge tumbled from the pocket of his faded shirt. It rolled once before coming to rest at the feet of a young officer, Ensign Reyes. He bent down to kick it aside, but his gaze froze. The inscription etched on its surface was blurred by time, yet still unmistakable. Holt, Gideon G3 to 89, B-Neg, USN. Reyes stood frozen. G3 to 89 was not just a number. It was a codename, a ghost in the classified special ops curricula, missions whose files were shredded before printing. Names like Seawall, Crimson Tide, or Echo Phantom whispered only behind closed doors after drills. As Gideon was escorted past towering stacks of containers, Reyes remained behind, clutching the metal lanyard as if holding onto a piece of history the whole system had tried to bury. The scent of sea salt drifted by, and for a fleeting moment he felt not suspicion but shame. Because if his suspicions were true, then the man he'd just handcuffed was not a culprit, but a legend erased from memory. Wait a moment. I have a small favor to ask you. Please hit like on the video, subscribe to the channel if you enjoy inspiring stories, and don't forget to leave a comment letting me know where are you watching from and what time is it where you live right now. I always love seeing people from all over the world come together to share one meaningful moment.
Welcome to Veteran Best Stories, where the war ends, but the stories live on. From the foxholes to front porches, we honor the silent battles our veterans still fight. Subscribe and walk with us beyond the battlefield.
The holding cell where Gideon was kept measured only a few square meters, its gray concrete walls devoid of windows, and the fluorescent tube on the ceiling pulsed softly like the breath of an ancient clock. Reyes stood in the corridor outside, his hand still gripping the metal badge lanyard as if it were a key to something he wasn't yet ready to unlock. All procedures were carried out to the book logging, inspections, analysis of the suspicious device. Yet Reyes's mind remained fixated on those three cold characters, G3-89. A few hours later, when no one in the intelligence unit could explain that code, he took the initiative to call a name he really shouldn't have involved in personal matters. Colonel Thorne, his mentor during the early years of training, now retired. The call lasted less than 3 minutes, but left Reyes with an unnamed shock. On the other end, Thorne's voice was husky after a few heavy breaths. "You said G3-89? It no longer exists, at least not on paper." He hesitated. "If you really saw that badge, Reyes, you've touched a part of history the Navy once buried." Then he recounted more as shards of memory torn from stone than as words. In 1989, amid a Caribbean refugee crisis, a small detachment was dispatched on an emergency maritime operation. No insignia, no official ship, no chance of retreat. They were G3, the special unit tasked with keeping vital sea lanes open for civilian vessels abandoned to pirate-infested waters. In a fierce engagement off Tortuga Island, a refugee vessel had been set ablaze at its fuel tanks. With the official Navy still 2 hours away, G3 arrived first. They fought through the flames, saving more than 200 men, women, and children from a sea of fire with no escape. According to Thorne, Gideon Holt was G3's team leader. He not only commanded but was the last man off the burning ship, ensuring every life was loaded onto the rescue boats. "You know the strangest part?" Thorne's voice grew low. "There isn't a single photograph. No after-action reports. G3-89 volts vanished just 3 weeks after the mission ended, as if they never existed." Reyes hung up, feeling the chills spread through him. What he had assumed were technical codes and tactical training symbols turned out to be relics of a buried chapter of history. Seawall, the name whispered in training as a silent legend. A mission without dates or rosters, rumored only as the small vessel that braved overwhelming firepower to rescue nameless souls. And now, the silent man cuffed this morning was at the center of that storm. Reyes sat back at the desk, light filtering through the dusty window. In his hand lay the badge, cold metal, yet seemingly coursing with blood and memory. What grew in his gut wasn't fear, but its oppositea, nameless emotion mingled with anger. Anger that the system tried to forget. Anger that a man like Gideon, who once safeguarded hundreds of lives, was now treated as a suspect. And anger at himself for nearly overlooking that lanyard. Inside the dark cell, Gideon still sat in silence. And in the corridor, Reyes knew he could not allow this man to be erased once more. The heavy steel door creaked open. Its hinges groaned like an aged sigh echoing down the damp corridor. Gideon stepped out, his back slightly bent, his gait unusually composed. No bitterness. No head held high as if to prove anything. He simply walked steadily toward the locker where his personal effects were kept, the only place he had left what mattered most: a small metal lanyard. The guard reached out mechanically to return it, but Reyes was already there, badge in hand. He said nothing for a long moment. Only when he stood close enough did he speak, his voice low, as if asking himself, "Sir, were you really at Seawall?" Gideon looked up. His eyes did not flinch or offer excuses. They were simply honest. And when he nodded, the silence thickened. "I am the last living member of G3, he said slowly, as though each word had to be carved from memory. Everyone else didn't come back. They sat down together, not in an interrogation room, but in an old engineering office with peeling concrete walls and a flickering yellow bulb like a candle. The cold cement floor pressed beneath their feet. Gideon took his place on a worn wooden chair. Reyes, still wearing his oil-stained uniform, sat opposite him. No questions needed, no recordings required. Gideon began to speak like a dam cracked open after years of pressure. It was August 1989. The Caribbean was an oven, its waves taller than a man. G3 received unofficial orders to enter international waters off Tortuguero. Hundreds of small boats were fleeing a besieged refugee camp, unacknowledged, uncommunicated, leaving no trace. Gideon remembered each wave striking the hull like cannon fire, each child hauled aboard by bare hands, skin blistered by floating fuel. He remembered the moment the G3 squad formed a human wall around the fuel leak to pull civilians to safety, and he remembered staying behind at the end. He wrapped the lanyard around his waist, slid into the engine room, and used cold steel in his bare hands to weld the cracked pipe, stopping the fire from spreading to the main tanks. When the burning vessel was pushed away by the storm and surf, he stood on deck, singed shoulders, listening to the engine's final roar like a comrade's last call. 3 days later, he washed ashore on a small island and was rescued by Haitian fishermen. No one came looking for him. No one spoke of G3. They had vanished. "We were ordered to silence," Gideon said, his gaze fixed on a crack in the wall. "No public record, no medals, but 231 lives survived that night. That was enough. I didn't need them to know my name, only that they lived long enough to tell the tale." Reyes said nothing, perhaps because no words could encompass what he had just heard. He looked at Gideon not as a suspect, but as a living fragment of history reclaimed. Each crease on that face seemed shaped by an ancient wave, and in that faded room, titles dissolved. There was no officer, no prisoner only, 2 men and a truth buried too long. Outside, Galveston's late afternoon sun sank quietly into the sea where a chapter of history had just been gently reopened by the hoarse voice of someone who no longer waited for belief. Dear viewers, take a moment to relax or grab a glass of water, then stay tuned for the rest of this unfolding story. Comment 1 if you're enjoying it, so we know you're still here. That night, Galveston lay shrouded in briny fog, as if the entire ocean were holding its breath to hear a story buried for over 3 decades. Reyes sat alone by the watch station window, the dim yellow light falling on the badge lanyard he'd been clutching since afternoon. He could not sleep, not out of doubt, but because something in Gideon's hoarse voice still trembled in his heart like an unnamed undertow crashing against rocks. No one had ordered him to keep investigating. No superior had pressed him for answers, but Reyes knew some truths, if left unpursued, die a second time. Before dawn, he drove 3 hours south to Corpus Christi, former hub of naval communications in the Gulf. The old signal station now housed only a few active tech rooms and a handful of retired staff who had returned because they couldn't live slowly. He wandered the halls, questioning one technician after another. Most shook their heads or directed him to another office. No one remembered Operation Seawall. No one knew what G3 stood for. Then, in a dusty corner, he found an old, bald man wearing an 80s wristwatch and sipping coffee from a chipped silver mug. When Reyes mentioned August 1989 and G3 vessel, the man paused and set down his mug. "What do you offer in exchange for this?" he asked, not in stern tones, but with the weary timbre of someone who'd known too much. Reyes said nothing. He simply placed the badge lanyard on the wooden table, as gently as if he feared scratching its surface. No more words were spoken. The technician opened a locked cabinet and withdrew an old tape reel labeled in faded ink. TTX, Cheat, Tortuga, 08, 1989, urgent recording. They sat in the darkened room, the projectors flicker their only light. A crackle filled the air, then an uncanny silence as if the world itself paused to listen. Then, a man's voice burst forth. Urgent, hoarse yet resolute. "No, stop, don't open valve 3. I'm in the compartment, save the civilians first. I'll hold back the fire." Distant explosions echoed, metal groaned and snapped. Then the recording cut to static. No names were spoken, no ranks announced. But Reyes knew this was the voice of the old man who had sat opposite him the night before, in that faded room, recounting the inferno like a waking nightmare. Reyes did not share the tape with the media. He posted it anonymously to an old military Furuma place where veterans, soldiers' families, and refugee kin still exchanged news, hopes, and unconfirmed truths. Under a hidden account, he uploaded the clip with the simple note: "Tortuga, August 1989. Has anyone else heard this?" Within an hour, responses flooded in. A woman posted a photo of her missing father, writing, "I've heard that very voice in his delirium for years." A young man commented, "My mother always said that when she was lifted from the burning ship, a man yelled through the radio. I never forgot that tone." 5 families, then 10, then 30, recognized the same thing. The voice on that tape was not only proof of the erased mission, but the final memory they retained of the person who saved them from a fiery sea. Gideon Holt never sought recognition. But memory once awakened needs no paperwork to validate it. And now, the voice he once believed only the ocean remembered had begun to spread again, living on in the hearts of every life he had rescued. Things thought forever buried sometimes need only a single voice, a gentle crack toe, blow the dust off history. Just 3 days after the recording went viral, the Naval Security Office issued an urgent notice. Reopen the internal investigation into Operation Seawall, a mission never officially acknowledged. It was rare and discreet. No press conferences, no live broadcasts. Yet within the gray walls of the Pentagon, the sealed doors of 30 years began to swing open. Witnesses were summoned, not high-ranking officers, but ordinary people. A woman bearing an old scar on her left arm who had been a child on a refugee boat. A sailor discharged after the trauma of an uncredited mission. An elderly nurse who treated cases of unknown origin. One by one they came, each providing a piece of the puzzle someone had tried to blur for decades. And at the center of that picture lay a name: Gideon Holt. In a special announcement on the 14th of November, the U.S. Navy officially confirmed the existence of Unit G3 and Operation Seawall. They called it heroism beyond the call of duty, authorized yet upholding naval honor. The phrase "beyond the call of duty" was emphasized not only in print, but in the speakers' voices, though for the first time they dared to admit that some sailors went further than orders. In Galveston, a small ceremony was held. No dais, no cameras, just an old pier, the afternoon sun spilling gently across calm waters. Fewer than a dozen people attended. Reyes in dress uniform, Colonel Thorne standing quietly by rotting pilings, 3 veteran comrades who'd trained with G3, and Gideon in the cleanest shirt he owned, wrists still trembling but eyes as steady as steel. The flag was carefully folded, and the senior commander approached, placing into his hand a small black velvet box inside, the Medal of Honor. The emerald blue ribbon caught the sunlight like a silent, surging wave. No applause, no words. Even the sea wind held its breath. Gideon received the medal and gazed at it long, as if trying to peer through the medal to the faces of those who had faced the flames with him. He spoke softly enough for Reyes and Thorne to hear, yet clear enough for the ocean itself to know. "Please engrave Mendoza, Kramer, Lee." They did not return. It was not the voice of a victor, nor the words of one exonerated. It was the voice of the survivor, the last keeper of memories for a fallen unit, now asking that recognition reach those who rest in unmarked graves. Reyes stood with reddened eyes but shed no tears. He understood the medal was never just for one man. It was a tribute to those whose names went unremembered, uncarved, on military headstones, unrecorded in history books. Now, at least, they had a witness. Gideon did not keep the medal. After the ceremony, he handed it to Reyes, saying it was too heavy for one man to bear. Then he quietly returned to his old boat, still streaked with the rust he'd not yet scrubbed away, and the anchor line he secured with hands that once trembled. Galveston's evening stretched longer than usual that day, as if the sun itself lingered to watch one last time the man who held back the flames for 231 lives and was finally called by his true name. No one imagined that a smartphone video under a minute long could move millions of hearts. Reyes hadn't intended to record that moment. He only wanted to keep for himself the final image of an old soldier bowing before a medal he'd never sought. But the instant Holt raised his right hand in salute to trembling yet resolute, his eyes reflecting the calm of one who has honored his oath, Reyes knew he could not keep that to himself. He posted the video online without sensational captions or dramatic music, just a single line, "The man America forgot." Within 72 hours, it surpassed 12 million views. Comments poured in like a waterfall. Veterans thanking him for reminding the world of unsung missions. Descendants of refugees recognizing the man who saved their grandparents. Young Americans seeing a medal unaccompanied by applause, yet arresting them in silent awe. National news covered it. A military channel reanimated Operation Seawall in animation, layering Holt's voice from the tape as narration. Schools across Texas began weaving the G3 to 89 estuary into contemporary history lessons as a vivid example of serving without recognition. But the most touching response came from the children of Galveston. They knew little of war or fleet names, yet their drawings spoke volumes. A small gray ship labeled G3, cutting through waves of flame, children reaching out ahead and behind them. An old man standing on deck, worn shirt, holding a simple metal lanyard. City leaders, in an extraordinary meeting, agreed to rename Dock 14, where Gideon was once arrested and had repaired ships for nearly 2 decades, Holt Pier. No fanfare, no speeches, just a small bronze plaque reading, "Holt Pier honoring the keeper of flames for nameless memories." A week later, veterans raised a modest statue at the pier. No, a bust. No armor or weapon, just the figure of an old man seated on a wooden bench, hand resting on his knee, gaze toward the sea. Around his neck hung that weathered metal lanyard reel, pitted by Salthung in silent tribute. At its base, a bronze plaque bore his words from the medal ceremony, with one added line, "G3 to 89, honor needs no medal, But memory needs a storyteller. Tourists began to pause there not for the beauty of the sculpture, but for the hush that fell as they read the inscription. They felt that quiet wonder upon realizing some choose to keep their vows rather than their medals. Reyes visits the pier monthly. The children now call him the G3 storyteller. He neither declines nor claims the title. He simply stands by the statue, fingers brushing the old lanyard, feeling the warmth of memory flow through his hand. And Gideon Holt, after the ceremony, returned to his boat, to the sea, and to the familiar silence. But he was no longer the nameless dockhand. He had become a reminder, a living story, proof that in places overlooked, a light may burn undimmed. Thanks to a short video, a simple metal badge, and a timely salute, generations to come have someone to believe in, that courage, however silent, will find its voice. Some spend a lifetime protecting others without ever seeking gratitude. Gideon Holt's story reminds us that honor does not lie in thunderous applause or gleaming medals, but in steadfast, silent acts preserved by memory and loyalty. Sometimes, the truth needs someone brave enough to listen. Sometimes, an old badge can awaken an entire forgotten generation. If this story touched your heart, please leave a comment, tell us about a veteran in your life, or simply share the feelings you carry after watching. Share this video with those who believe in gratitude, belated recognition, and memories that must never fade. Thank you for listening. And don't forget, sometimes the greatest heroes are those living quietly among us.